Hello and welcome to At the Forefront FinTech Conversations. I'm Sam Belden, head of content at Forefront, and with me today is William Wilson. Willie is a senior analyst at CMG. Willie, welcome to At the Forefront.
Hi, thanks, Sam. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. So, for those who might not be aware, CMG provides data and workflow solutions that connect and promote transparency and visibility among equity capital market participants, both buy side and sell side. And CMG recently published an ebook entitled "From Raw Data to Actionable Insights," and that ebook addresses a question that I know comes up a lot in a space like ECM, where there's a lot of data. What does it take for intelligence in this market to actually be decision ready and fuel decisive action among market participants? So, Willie, maybe we could start there. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective what differentiated data really looks like in an equity capital markets context?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we always strive for timely, complete, and accurate data. And it's really those core pillars that I think differentiate our data from other providers. In terms of timeliness, we understand that in the case of an overnight book build or an ABB, the decisions need to be made quickly. Books may only be open for a short window. So our data team is really striving to get those deals up in our system as fast as possible following the offering launch. So, we're not just adding deals after pricing or settlement. We're pushing to get deals up on our live ECM calendar in time for buy side to make informed decisions. When it comes to completeness, we're really striving to touch on every relevant data point that could potentially be relied upon by either the buy side or the sell side. Currently we're tracking well over 100 individual data points for any given ECM transaction. So we're really digging into the granular details of each transaction and thinking about what's needed to accurately compare transactions holistically. This could be something as small as, is this a cleanup trade for an existing shareholder? Is there an associated share buyback? And if so, how's it structured? Is it being done as a concurrent private placement, or is it part of the stated deal size? We're even going as far as not just showing performance, but performance relative to the broader market, so we can clearly define the potential alpha related to an offering. And beyond individual offering completeness, we're really focused on data coverage completeness in the regional sense. And that means taking a bit of a regionally agnostic approach, casting a wide coverage net to ensure proper depth of our data. A good example of that might be the Kenya Pipelines IPO that was completed earlier this week. That's the largest IPO in the Nairobi exchange, I believe, since 2008.
Hmm.
That raised over $800 million. But in general, this market is pretty quiet and easily overlooked. I guess the last piece of those core pillars is really accuracy, and I think accuracy really speaks for itself. To be a trusted data source, we have to be certain of the accuracy of our data. So, with that in mind, we've built a large system of checks to really ensure overall data quality. And I guess one other differentiator I'd touch on is structure and usability. It doesn't matter if we have the best data available or if we don't properly present it to the end user. It's kind of all for nothing, right? So we have a number of ways in which users can consume the data. The most common of which is probably the UI, which is a suite of reports where you can easily filter and tailor outputs, save, download, and share those reports, right? But we also offer dedicated API feeds and even an Excel plugin.
Great. So that was a great overview. I know that one theme that sort of comes up in the ebook a few different times is the depth and the global nature of your analytics, which you talked about a little bit there. I know that you also talk about bringing a practitioner's perspective to the data and analytics that you deliver. Can From that standpoint, can you talk a little bit more about some of the specific capabilities that you guys bring to your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think this really goes back to usability, structure, and presentation of the data. Um, Analytics really comes down to how the end user can leverage that data. So if I'm an ECM practitioner and I want to quickly see a snapshot of ECM fundraising for a specific issuer, I don't want to run one report for follow-ons, one for convertible debt, and maybe another for ATMs. I want to quickly search for that issuer and see it all in one place. So, it really comes down to how you slice and dice the data. So we publish both real-time, global live, and priced offering calendars.
Hmm.
We publish a lockup calendar, structure and pricing reports, league tables, and custom tailored reports as well. So, one existing pain point we really work to address is custom reporting and filter criteria. So analytics means granular details. So if we're publishing a specific data point, we allow the user to leverage that data point as a report filter and even layer multiple filters. So if a practitioner wants to see something as specific as all registered blocks in the energy sector within, say, a certain deal size, market cap, or discount range, we make that report very easy to generate. And I think that really stems from the founders at CMG all having a background as former sell side ECM practitioners. They've all sat in that seat where they get the call on a Friday afternoon. They need to put together a pitch book and end up spending the weekend running analysis. So, we're keenly aware of our end users and actively working to address those pain points.
Yeah.
Um, if a practitioner is relying on a specific Excel report to power some kind of charts or visuals, let's say a sales deck or even a recap, we're trying to provide them the tools to do that as efficiently as possible. And that may mean simply refreshing an existing Excel report using the Excel plugin rather than having to re-pull the entire report, and hopefully giving that user, some of their weekend back.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know from working with lots of our clients, everyone can talk a good game about client engagement, client alignment, but there's nothing that drives that alignment like having sat in that seat, experienced those pain points firsthand. So good to hear a little bit about that perspective that you guys bring. One thing I wanted to ask about, obviously, it's not uncommon to see price moves that are disconnected from earnings or macro news or seemingly the cause and effect is not really obvious. From your perspective, working deeply with ECM data, what are some of those structural drivers of price moves or those signals that investors may be underestimating that you see as having a bigger impact than it might seem at first?
Yeah, man, great question. I think we could do an entire podcast on
Yeah.
on this question alone. Um, but from an ECM perspective, there's a number of market movers that I think are commonly underestimated. I think the most glaring example is likely a primary capital raise and the associated dilution. But really, any follow-on is going to be a price mover, or at the very least, a liquidity event. Uh, in a primary raise, where an issuer is raising capital that's going to dilute existing owners, all their things remaining equal, the dilution is effectively reducing earnings per share. And that's why it's very important to look at deal size as a percentage of market cap to properly gauge potential dilution. Of course, there's other factors in play. Use of proceeds, for example. Maybe those proceeds are earmarked for an acquisition that's actually accretive, for example. But in the case of, say, a secondary sell down or a block trade, while those are non-dilutive, it's still increasing the float and likely generating a large volume spike. In those examples, I'd point to the deal size as a multiple of average daily trade volume preceding the offering launch is kind of a key indicator.
Mhm.
And just like a primary capital raise, there's of course other factors in play that could skew sentiment in price movement as well. For example, if it's a secondary sale, is it a cleanup trade? We'll often see IPOs that are followed by recurrent secondary share follow-ons, where pre-IPO investors are selling down their position. So, if a follow-on marks a full cleanup trade from that investor, then there's no longer the possibility of future sales overhanging the stock. So, while most every ECM transaction creates potential for a disconnected price movement, it really comes down to the details. I'd say the other ECM event investors are pretty keenly aware of is as a potential price mover is going to be the lockup expiration.
Mm.
Um, these can result in pretty large liquidity events for insiders, or in other cases, just signal the opening of a window for a potential additional secondary sell down.
Great. Uh, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, some of the practical impact of some of this data visibility granularity. Can you tell us a little bit about how your data analytics are actually used? What changes for some of your clients when they have data with this level of differentiation? And maybe you can give the buy side view, the sell side view, and tell me how those workflows materially change armed with these insights.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just more informed decision making on both sides, right? Buy side or sell side. Differentiated data really provides the end user a competitive advantage. And that could be through reduced reconciliation efforts for the end user, maybe by providing a clearer view of issuance trends or just more confident comp analysis. The buy side user specifically is likely going to be very tied to that live calendar. The data there is going to help them manage those day-to-day ECM workflows, and on a global scale, especially, just managing the daily ECM volume can be pretty overwhelming
Yeah.
without a singular source of data. Performance trends are also something buy-side users are likely very focused on. Performance trends can really help guide indications, holding period decisions, and just kind of dictate overall strategy. And then on the sell side use case, they're more likely focused on price deals, right? Maybe not looking at the live calendar quite as much. And they're using those data sets to really guide deal structures, scan for precedent transactions. League tables are certainly going to be a focus of the sell side. But really, our end users vary pretty dramatically. We have everything from bulge bracket investment banking teams to portfolio managers to quants and event traders. So it really runs the gamut.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I wanna make sure that we talk about what this looks like at global scale, because I know that's a key point. I know a lot of providers talk a good game about, delivering global ECM data, but, actually following through on that promise, can be quite complex, and, you guys have an interesting approach to how you, tackle the global angle. So tell me a little bit about sort of where that difficulty is and how you guys deliver this level of insight on a global scale.
Yeah, I mean, truly complete global coverage is certainly challenging. It's very easy to try and understand regional nuances outside of the U.S. through the lens of U.S. ECM, and that's often the wrong way to look at it. Our approach at CMG has always been to let practitioners guide the product, and that's the same approach we're taking with global coverage. We're continuously having discussions with practitioners in different markets to help us highlight those smaller regional nuances, um, and that can really help us guide the product. This is likely to be something we're constantly iterating on as we continue to have these conversations and learn more. But luckily, we're a pretty dynamic organization, which makes us pretty adaptable as we learn about these nuances and make changes to the product. Um, an example of these nuances are things like tranche clawbacks and Hong Kong IPOs, or very specific follow-on structures in India. Uh, and we need to take that feedback and incorporate it into the product. So rather than fit those into US ECM buckets, we're working to update our data as well as our product to accommodate what we're finding in these different regions. So, today we cover somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 plus regions. We have historical data going back to 2006. And I think that data encompasses 12,000 or so IPO records.
Yeah.
I think it's over 20,000 follow-ons, 2,000 or so converts, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 ATM programs. So, it's growing every day, and we're continuing to learn, and we're continuing to adapt as a result.
Fantastic. Makes sense. And just to sort of stick with the global angle, wanted to get your thoughts on something that's happening right now, a little bit timely. I know that there's been some renewed discussion in Europe around ECM modernization and the need to foster straight through processing when it comes to those workflows. Can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective, where Europe sort of is on that roadmap and where a solution like CMG or just differentiated better quality data and intelligence in general can help close that gap?
Yeah, I think it's important for me to first mention that CMG was founded as a result of some of the antiquated processes in place within US ECM.
Mhm.
And CMG's XC product has really gone a long way to bring these workflows into the modern age. I actually worked on the buy side prior to joining CMG, and I've been in that seat where you're getting your early morning calls with allocations and kind of scribbling them down on a notepad, and on occasion you'll find out at settlement that maybe you wrote it down wrong, maybe there's some kind of miscommunication. And XC has successfully really closed that gap with the buy side and sell side through connectivity. And it's also made huge strides for the sell side in terms of book building, merging books across multiple uh, book runners, reducing duplicate orders. So we've really made some big impacts in US ECM workflows, and I think Europe is likely to be the next market where we'll try to make an impact. CMG had a roundtable discussion back in January, and there's pretty broad agreement that modernization is necessary in Europe. Certainly from my side, we'll need to continue to adapt our data to account for those regional nuances that we discussed.
Yeah.
And I think the next steps are really just going to be to continue the discussions with stakeholders so that we can work together to modernize European ECM.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. Great to hear about the momentum that you guys are sort of seeing in that region and also the momentum that they're making towards modernizing some of their ECM processes. So great stuff. Willie, want to thank you for taking the time to hop on, talk us through some of those firsthand challenges that the buy side and the sell side face when it comes to ECM visibility and intelligence, and then talking us through a few different vectors of how CMG helps them close that gap and get closer to having a fully informed view of the market. So, for those of you who'd like to learn more about CMG and its products and its data, you guys can head over to cmgx.io for more information. If you'd like to hear more episodes about the Forefront, you could head over to forefrontcoms.com, head over to the news and insights section. So, once again, this has been At the Forefront. Willie, really appreciate your time and thoughts today.
Hey, thanks, Sam. Great chatting.